When I think about my journey with English, I remember the first time I tried to speak. My tongue froze. My mind went blank. My face felt hot. The words stayed inside my head. The few that came out sounded broken. Some students laughed. Others looked away. I felt small. I felt weak. I wanted to hide. For many months, I avoided English. I told myself it was too hard. I thought maybe English was not for people like me. But deep inside, I knew the truth. English was the language of opportunity. It opened doors to jobs. It opened doors to travel. It opened doors to education. It opened doors to friendships around the world. I knew that if I kept running away from English, I would be running away from my future. One day I made a decision. I promised myself I would learn. I would not stop no matter how slow. I would not stop no matter how hard. I would not stop no matter how many mistakes I made. I started to treat English as part of my life. I listened to it every day. I read it every day. I spoke it every day. I wrote it every day. I began with small steps. I watched short videos in English. I used subtitles. I listened to each word. I paused the video. I repeated the sentence out loud. I tried to match the tone. I tried to match the rhythm. At first, it felt strange. My pronunciation sounded wrong. My mouth felt awkward, but I kept going. I repeated the words again and again. Slowly, the sounds felt natural. I carried a small notebook. I wrote down new words. I wrote down new phrases. I found them in movies. I found them in songs. I found them in podcasts. I found them in conversations. At night, I opened my notebook. I read the words aloud. I made sentences with them. I recorded my voice. I listened to the recording. I compared it to native speakers. Slowly, I felt more confident. But I knew listening and writing were not enough. I had to speak. Speaking was the hardest. I feared being judged. But I reminded myself of something important. Even native speakers make mistakes. Why should I be afraid? I tried speaking in real life. I ordered food in English. My voice shook. I forgot some words. But the waiter understood me. I got my food. That small moment felt like a big win. I repeated it. I spoke to friends. I spoke to strangers. I spoke to myself when I was alone. Practice turned knowledge into skill. I learned from songs. I listened to the lyrics. I read them. I understood their meaning. I sang along. I read short stories out loud. I underlined new words. I looked them up later. My vocabulary grew. I practiced grammar in a diary. I started with short sentences. I made them longer. I checked my mistakes online. I corrected them. Slowly, correct grammar became natural. My brain started to think in English. I saw a car and thought, that car is red. Without translating, that was progress. But sometimes I felt stuck. I thought I was not improving. Those moments were dangerous. They made me want to quit. But I remembered a lesson. Learning is like growing a tree. You do not see the growth every day, but it is still happening. I kept going. I practiced even when I felt lazy. I practiced even when I felt tired. Consistency was my weapon. 10 minutes every day was better than 3 hours once a week. I learned to enjoy the process. I stopped waiting for the final result. English became part of my life. I changed my phone language to English. I followed English speakers online. I watched the news in English. I wrote shopping lists in English. I surrounded myself with the language. Slowly, English stopped feeling foreign. My fear faded. I became curious. I became excited. I understood jokes in movies without subtitles. I joined online communities. I met people from different countries. We practiced English together. I learned about their cultures. English became alive. I learned that perfection was not the goal. Connection was the goal. The more I focused on connection, the faster I improved. I went from being silent to helping others. I shared tips that worked for me. Listen more than you speak. Speak more than you write. Write more than you read. Read more than you think you can. Live inside the language. Do it every day. Do it without fear. Do it without excuses. Do it without stopping. When I learned English, I did not wait for the perfect moment. I started with what I had. I used free resources. I used the internet. I used the radio. I used the library. I found free books online. I downloaded free apps. I listened to English music every day. I made a playlist. I listened on the bus. I listened while walking. I listened before sleeping. My ears began to recognize common words. My mouth began to copy the sounds. I repeated phrases many times. I did not care if people stared. I knew they were not the ones who would live my dreams. I joined free online classes. I spoke in group discussions. First, my hands shook. My voice was low, but every session made me stronger. I learned that mistakes were my teachers. I stopped being afraid of them. I started to laugh at them. When I said something wrong, I corrected it and moved on. I learned from every mistake. I made flashcards. On one side, I wrote the word. On the other side, I wrote the meaning and an example sentence. I reviewed them every night. I tested myself in the morning. I carried the cards in my pocket. I studied while waiting in line. I studied while sitting in traffic. I used every small moment. I learned that small moments built big skills. I watched cartoons in English. They used simple words. They spoke slowly. They made learning fun. I also watched interviews. I noticed how people used body language. Copied it. I copied their expressions. Copied their tone. I even copied their pauses. This made my English sound more natural. I practiced thinking in English. When I woke up, I said to myself, "Today I will speak English." When I made tea, I said, "I am making tea." When I walked outside, I said, "I am going to the shop." Thinking in English trained my brain. It stopped me from translating in my head. It made speaking faster. I joined social media groups for English learners. I posted comments. I asked questions. I answered questions. I made friends from other countries. We spoke in English only. I learned new slang. I learned idioms. I learned how real people talk. I practiced pronunciation by reading tongue twisters. They were hard. They made my mouth work harder. They improved my clarity. I recorded myself reading a paragraph. I listened to my mistakes. I recorded again. Each time I sounded better. I started to shadow speakers. This means listening to a sentence and speaking at the same time. It was difficult. It trained my brain and my mouth together. I joined language exchange calls. I taught someone my language. They taught me English. It was free. It was fun. It built friendships. I used English to describe my day in a diary. I wrote about what I ate. I wrote about what I felt. I wrote about what I learned. Over time, my writing became stronger. My spelling improved. My grammar improved. I learned to write emails. I learned to write messages. I learned to write essays. I read books for children first. I moved to short stories. Then I moved to novels. Each level gave me more confidence. I read out loud to practice speaking and reading together. I did listening practice by watching the same video many times. First with subtitles. Then without subtitles. I noticed how much more I understood. I joined English-speaking events in my city. I introduced myself to strangers. I smiled. I listened more than I spoke. I asked questions. People liked to answer. That kept the conversation going. I learned that speaking is not only about words. It is about listening, understanding, and replying. I reminded myself every day that progress comes from action. Not from wishing, not from planning, but from doing. I avoided negative people. I stayed close to those who encouraged me. I read motivational quotes in English. I watched motivational speeches in English. I let English fill my environment. I let it enter my thoughts. I let it shape my habits. Day by day, I became a new person. English no longer scared me. It excited me. I knew I could go further. I aimed for fluency. I knew fluency was not magic. It was the result of small daily efforts. So I kept going. And now, when I look back, I see the path clearly. It was not luck. It was not talent. It was daily action. It was small steps repeated many times. It was patience. It was courage. It was refusing to quit. I started with fear, but I ended with confidence. I started with silence, but I ended with a voice. I started without a single English sentence, but I ended with stories to tell. And this is what I know now: anyone can learn English. Anyone can speak well. Anyone can reach fluency. You do not need to be rich. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to start. You only need to keep going. Your mistakes will teach you. Your efforts will shape you. One day you will look back and you will smile because you will see that the person who once feared English is gone, and the person who owns English is standing right where you are.